Sales time. It's an honest, no BS, non salesy conversation about enterprise data management with tasty beverages in hand. I'm Tim Gasper, longtime data nerd and product guy at data.world, joined by Juan. Hey, Juan.
Hey, I'm Juan Cicada. I'm the principal scientist here at Data.World, and Wednesday, middle of the week, end of the day, and it's always awesome that we get the chance to have this conversation that Data.World actually lets us spend our day to go chat about data, have a drink in the middle of the week. And today we have an awesome guest. This is somebody whose name has been in the industry for a long time, who has made so many changes, who's shaked up the industry. This is Andy Palmer, who is the co-founder and CEO of Tamr. Formerly, he was the CEO of Vertica, that revolutionized the data warehouse. I mean, he's an ex-Trilogy guy. I mean, Andy is somebody who's just seen so much and has been around and know what's going on. Andy, it is a pleasure to have you here on Catalog and Cocktails. Thank you so much for being here. Cheers.
Great to see you guys. Fantastic to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So excited to have you.
So let's kick it off on what are we drinking and what are we toasting for? Andy, you go first.
You bet. I'm drinking Nika coffee, Japanese whiskey, which I love. It's very smooth. And, I'm toasting Boston's new mayor, first woman mayor in Boston, Michelle Wu.
That is awesome. That is so cool. I actually saw her tweet that she's like, here's finally my business card arrived. Like, that was so cool to go see that.
She's a rock star.
Yeah. How about you? How about you, Tim?
I am currently drinking a maple rye old fashioned, which is actually a repeat. It's the first time me doing a repeat on a cocktail. But the reason why I'm doing that is because our product management intern, Nancy Prabhakar, brought some Canadian maple syrup down. She says it's the best maple syrup in all of Canada. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do a repeat cocktail and I'm going to leverage this. So that's what's going into this. And I'll cheers to that as well. Very excited to have a female mayor over there.
And I always make my cocktail kind of last minute. Went down and I'm like, I got some tonic, but I can't do a gin. That's to be too boring. So I'm having a rum and tonic with some oranges in it. Even though every time I hear the name Andy Palmer, I always think Arnold Palmer, and I really wanted to make an Arnold Palmer drink, but didn't have lemonade and the iced tea. But this is great. So hey, cheers to the new mayor of Boston. This is great.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.
So we got our warm-up question today, which is what was a big purchase you made that you almost immediately regretted?
Yeah, it's a weird one too, because there was a long lead up. I just finished redoing my kitchen in my apartment in Cambridge in Harvard Square. And I got caught up in the process and the people involved, and I was really excited. And almost immediately after we were done, it sort of hit me like, I literally don't cook. I go out for every single meal. And so I'm like, why did I just redo this kitchen? Like, nobody's ever going to use this stove. Like, what's the point? It's crazy. But you can get caught up in it, right? This home reno stuff is crazy.
Yeah, you get invested, and it probably looks great now, though, right?
Oh, it's fantastic. It looks great. Yeah, but I just drop my bag off there when I go on my way to bed after dinner. Yeah.
Well, you can invite dinner parties. Have other people go cook for you then.
There we go. Exactly.
There you go. It's an investment. You got to think about it that way, right?
Right.
How about you, Tim? Do you have one?
That's a good question. Maybe when I bought my solar panels, because that was a pretty big purchase. And I was like, and then right after I bought them, I was like, oh man, it's such a long ROI period. And, but hey, it's green. It's, putting energy back in the grid. So, in the end, it works out.
Yeah, I remember I bought my first condo when I was in school. I was going to start my PhD. I'm like, well, if I'm going to be in school for 6-7 years so it was a big purchase, but I had the opportunity to go buy something kind of in East Austin, East downtown. The realtor told me it's going to be a tough couple of years, but I didn't do that. So I regret buying the place I did now because I should have bought something else. But oh well, we learn from this stuff. But hey, anyway, the question was about this big stuff because we're going to be talking about kind of monolithics and open and closed ecosystems and stuff. So let's just start with the discussion. And honest and no BS question is, should monolithic data architectures die? Should they cease to exist? Or is there actually going to be good reasons to actually have them around?
Yeah, like, it's weird. I think about this stuff, I've been a consumer of data products more times than a producer or a seller in my career in the last 30 years. And so I think about this from the perspective of somebody that, buys software to go do cool things with data inside of big companies. And, like, none of the products that a vendor builds and brings to market are complete enough to do all the things that people are trying to do with data nowadays. They're just sort of by definition incomplete. And so, I think the thing that gets in the way for a lot of vendors is they have this hubris. They have this self-pride. They think they're building the next great, amazing data thing. And God forbid they're a startup and they only have 20 or 30 million bucks. But the reality is, like, we need to do so much with our data, especially in big companies that are data driven, that I think the only way you do this is by taking things that are best of breed and kind of hooking them together in well-defined, clear endpoints, so that you can, take all the data you can possibly get your hand on and all the data you will get your hands on over time, and build, test, and release it into a place where people can consume the clean, curated data. And it's kind of like, like we need to think about, building, testing, and releasing great data the same way that we think about using DevOps to build, test, and release software very, very quickly and at a very high quality. So, but I think we're in the early days of that. So to do this kind of next gen data, like data management and infrastructure, like, you have to be best of breed about it. No one vendor, has, the ability to build everything that you're going to need. And sometimes you need, like, something that's so, like, in some way, like, so powerful and really good that you need really a best of breed approach. Just my opinion.
So, is that an argument then, against the monolith? Is that
yeah, like, I believe in open ecosystems. I really believe, this term DataOps is so popular now, and I think it's really good. Or a couple of us that were involved in kind of coining that term, 8 or 9 years ago, and that, like, the cool thing about DataOps is sort of a call out to DevOps, right? Which is, when you go to do DevOps in modern software engineering, you don't go to one big vendor and buy DevOps, right? You go and you use GitHub for your source code control. You go to get the Atlassian suite. You go to New Relic. You go to this collection of vendors. Then you assemble that stuff as it's sort of important and valuable to you in order to build, test, and release software. It should be the same thing with data, right? You don't go to one vendor to buy all of it. Like, you go get all the different pieces. You go buy data catalog over here. You go get your persistence and your compute infrastructure, probably from one of the big cloud vendors. You go get your pipelining tools, right? And sometimes it's open source, sometimes it's private. Like, for pipelining or orchestration, like, I love Airflow. I think it's great. I use that a lot when I was, running all the data stuff over at Novartis. So, I just think there's so much good tooling out there. And if you get the endpoints right, that's the hard part, is to get the endpoints right between these things. Like, you can configure things to kind of work well together and suit your needs. As opposed to, like, spending a bunch of money to some big vendor. Again, Palantir is my favorite sort of whipping boy for this stuff. And then, like, hope that they'll give you the things you need in order to be successful. Like, what are the odds? Not good. Yeah.
Okay. So is it safe to say, I don't put your words in your mouth, that the monolithic should die? Like, we should not have to go buy these things out. Like, they shouldn't exist.
Yeah. I think monoliths are dead. I think they're already dead. Like, the only people that'll tell you they're working are the vendors that are trying to sell them to you, right? On the other side, like, I don't meet many happy Palantir customers, right? They sort of pull, some tens of millions of dollars out of every one of their customers, and they deliver some software to them to do something. And usually the first team that shows up on the ground is really talented and are able to do something really good. So they kind of, feel good after spending tens of millions of dollars. But then it kind of tails off after that. And they're like, wait a minute, did we get the value for the 20 million bucks we just spent on Palantir? And we see this a lot on the data quality side of the equation, right? Where they're pretty good at analytics stuff. Again, that's like their sweet spot. That's what their platform's really good at. But when it comes to, like, the data management, DQ stuff, like, not so much, right? And so we get a lot of calls from PowerShare. So like, our data sucks. Come clean it up, please. Yeah. So
I love the boldness and the honest no BS. Like monolithics are dead. You started saying like best of breed, which by the way I fully agree with you. Like it's the best of breed of things. One of the concerns I have, and we bring this up all the time, is we're just partitioning things. There's just new categories more and more, and everybody's creating their own category. And then you look at the Matt Turk data landscape, and there's what 50, 60 buckets. So do I need 50, 60 things and 50, 60 like that is, we went to another extreme. So, okay, agree that monolithics are not, we don't want that, but then are we cutting everything up to their extreme? Like that's bad too.
Totally. And, this is such a good point. So like back in 2003, my partner for many years is this guy, Mike Stonebreaker. A lot of us use Postgres and so much. So
quick parentheses, like everybody should know who Mike Stonebreaker is. Right? He's like the father of database management systems. Be sure that we know who we're talking about here.
That's right. Yeah. And so Mike and I, we published a paper back in 2003 called "One Size Does Not Fit All in Database Systems." And it was kind of weird because at the time in 2003, if you were going to do something and you said, listen, I'm going to use some specialty database instead of Oracle, SQL Server, or DB2, people were like, what are you doing? Like, why would you ever use anything other than one of the big relational databases, right? And, Mike and I just felt like, we had kind of stagnated in terms of new design patterns in database systems because everybody sort of conceded that, they were going to sell their firstborn to Larry Ellison. And, we just knew this was not true. And so we built Vertica at the time out of that. And, the Google team was building what became Bigtable and BigQuery. There was like 5 or 6 different things and that were kind of emerging. But now we've got this problem. There's too many of these random database systems. Like, what do you pick, right? Single store used to be MemSQL, which is like a column store and a row store combined together. Do you use the database system in your cloud vendor of choice? Do you try something that's open source and cheap? You pick up Cassandra or HBase or, like you said, there's too many options. But like at the core, like these things are built, right? They have some physical characteristics, right? So you've got things that are row stores that are, really good for writes, like all the traditional relational databases were like that. And then you have column stores, which are generally much better for reads, right? Yeah, they're right. They're organized so that you can get data out very efficiently. You have graph databases, like which, when you need to, represent the data so that it can be explored in all kinds of weird ways. Like it's very useful and good and powerful. And you have doc stores, right? Like Mongo, right? And Couch and these kinds of things. And and then maybe you've got key value stores, which one might argue are kind of a flavor of column store, but so like but they're like less than 8 like core design patterns that each one of these data systems can fall into, because like there's only so many ways to represent bits on disk, right? Like, I mean, come on, right? And so Mike and I, we just been around for long enough. We're like, well, there's like these 6 to 8 patterns, and each one of these systems falls into one of those patterns. The mistake I see a lot of people making is they use whatever's hot and popular, right? And like there was a lot of this going on with NoSQL stuff, back when data lakes were the vogue. And like Mike and I came out back in 2007, and we tried really hard to call bullshit on data lakes and HDFS. We were like, these are not database systems. Like they've not been engineered. Like they were originally designed to aggregate log files in the big internet companies. And, MapReduce is just like, it's not a panacea, right? It's just, you looked under the covers at what it was. You're like, no, any good, solid database researcher or hardcore database systems engineer be like, yeah, that's not going to work for all this stuff that they were trying it for. And so like the hardest part is getting people to understand that, look, what is their use case? What do they really care about? What are they optimizing for on any given workload? And then pick one of the things that kind of fits in the category that's physically aligned with what you're trying to do. So there's like, if you've been around long enough and you've seen these patterns, it's like common sense,
Yeah. You start to see how these puzzle pieces can fit into the solution depending on the value and the use case that you're driving towards, right?
That's right. That's right.
And, I think you make some really great points here. And just before we move on, just one more thing on this whole monolith topic. there does seem to be this infatuation that, it ebbs and flows in terms of its trendiness and which technology it gravitates towards, in
Yeah.
terms of like, hey, this idea of the silver bullet that like, oh man, if
Yeah.
we can combine these things together into one thing, then I just have to implement one thing. And you think about like, because then, the whole like one throat to choke kind of thing, like, one
Yeah.
vendor or one technology, or you
Right.
think integration, right? Integration's always a pain, right? So if
Yeah.
you've got 7 different technologies that you have to integrate together, that's harder than, one or
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? Is it a
Well,
balance, or do you think that's
yeah.
overstated?
No, it's a balance, right? Like you got to decide. Like you can't have again, database systems, core like persistent systems is a good example, right? Because there are dozens and dozens of options, right? Way too many for some mere mortal to grok. So what do you do? Well, you have to sort of put these things into buckets and organize, and then you got to decide what your endpoints are going to be, right? Like I'm a big SQL guy. I think that JSON is great, and NoSQL systems helped us build out JSON. It's really useful, very important, and a good complement to SQL. But declarative languages kind of matter, like as an endpoint, right? I remember Mike and I had a buddy who was working on the core Google Bigtable team, and they didn't do SQL in the first version of Bigtable. And we were like, well, like, how are people going to get their data out? And like, well, they'll come and talk to us, and if they'll write their own code, or else they'll ask us and we'll write it for them. We came back like 2 years later, and we're like, how's it going? He's like, I hate my job. And we're like, what's wrong? He's like, I have to write every query for these stupid business people, and it's going to take forever. And like, I'm so sick of it. Can you get me out of here? Like, and we're like, well, you didn't put a declarative language on top of the data. Like, it's self-abuse, man. Like, so these endpoints I think are really important, right? Like if you get the endpoints right, like you make your life easier. And like SQL in, SQL out, kind of a good thing, or JSON in, JSON out, like that's kind of a good idea in database systems. But when you think about the broader sort of data engineering ecosystem and where things begin and end, one of my favorite things about like catalogs is a good example. Like when I implemented, I built like 3 catalogs in the last 10 years. And one of the, ones when I built when I was at Novartis, like it was a really good crawler and registration system. Like, so it just went through all the database tables and all the Oracle and SQL Server that we had. And then it just registered these things. So there was a place you could go and find, sort of what was in, with a little bit of sample data, what was in every single one of these things, right? And it was really useful and good for what we were doing 10 years ago. Now there's much fancier things, right? Like you guys provide at Data.World. But these like having a thing, well, this is my data catalog, and sort of not pretending that the data catalog does, also, sort of doesn't make your Arnold Palmer for you. When you want to, like, the worst example would be visualization tools and analytics, right? There was a vendor that was, I won't say who it was, but we were one of our investors, Google Ventures, had invested in both them and us, and so we'd have these sessions at GV where they would have her in to meet with some big Fortune 500 company, and then I would go in and give my pitch afterwards. And so I couldn't help but hear what her pitch was, and she had like a whole like data system that was hooked up to Viz tools out of the box, and it was like not only directly competitive with everything we were doing, but it was competitive with all the visualization tools, right? It was kind of the classic, single vendor, single platform kind of a thing. And I used to go in after she would present, and I would be like, hey, all that stuff that she just talked about? And they'd be like, yeah, like, the Viz stuff, and then the data management stuff, and the presenter, like, we do like one of the 5 things she described, and we do that really, really well. Like, and if you need that really good thing, like, hey, like, that's cool. Like, let's talk. But if you are trying to solve this, like, sort of, or you believe and buy into that she can do it all, like, okay, go for it. Right. And that company doesn't exist anymore. But, like I just, the reason I have this opinion about these best of breed and open ecosystems is because, like, I've seen the play over and over and over again, and, when I started at Novartis, where, my buddy Remy Avard, who was the CIO at the time, he wanted my title to be data czar. And I was like, no, that sounds a little like bad. Like, czars are probably a good thing, right? Let's not do that. But at the time, the IBM folks had come in, and we were kind of going to try and organize all of our data at Novartis in the research group. And IBM had proposed like $150 million project to do this for Novartis' research group. And we looked at this thing in like 8 weeks till Sunday, and we're like, like, I don't think there's any way they can do anything that they've said, right? And they're sort of making this promise. And because we know under the covers, like the products that they were going to use to do this, it was a collection of like 30 different things. And none of those products integrated, like the stuff that they had bought, some they built, but it was like a collection of, and we're like, it doesn't really hold together. Like some sales and marketing people had gotten together and say, hey, we're going to pitch this as one big platform. But under the covers, it was still a bunch of things that were sort of woven together. And it was like, well, if we're going to weave stuff together, like we'll just do that ourselves, and we'll buy the stuff that's best in the world, not the stuff that happens to have the IBM brand on it, And so we killed it, and then we went off and we built it ourselves. And our thing, instead of having 30 things in it, it had 6 or 7 things in it.
So this is, you said something very, very key here, which is we do that one thing very, very well. Mm-hmm. So it makes me think, like, should we just stick to your swimming lane, right? Just be the best of that. So if that's the case, then what are those different swimming lanes or pillars that we should have? You were mentioning already, taking notes here, right? You're talking about my notes. Where are my notes? You were talking about a catalog, talk about a compute persistence, right? So that can be one of the clouds, and then also, I guess, some storage layer, your database. You're talking about pipeline orchestration,
right?
What are the other ones that should go? Because we all know it shouldn't just be arguments that we shouldn't be one. But it probably shouldn't be 50. So what are those different buckets, those things that we should be considering?
So I'll give you this is my opinion. And I've been pretty vocal about this stuff, right? Because I spent a lot of time just trying to help people build out their next gen data engineering ecosystems, right? And so there's call it 7 of these things. Catalog is one, as you mentioned. The persistence and the storage and the compute is another. And you're probably, if you're doing something modern and relatively new, like if you're doing greenfield, like you're probably going to do it on a cloud vendor, right? And then the data pipelining is the third one. Lots of different ways to do that. When I was at Novartis, like I had thousands of Python pipelines, right? And I just needed something to orchestrate it better and more consistently, right? I wasn't going to replace all these thousands of pipelines. I just needed to make sure that they were all behaving reasonably well so that we could maintain them. And so pipelining is the third one, right? And then, I believe, data mastering, I think is kind of a one. This is one we focus on at Tamr. And then you have data governance. And privacy and policy. And I think there's 2 flavors of governance. One is a source-based governance kind of a thing, and the other is a consumption-based governance kind of component. And then at the other end of the spectrum, on the other side, you've got a data consumption tool. So this is like I think of it as publish, right? But it's kind of the place where you put all of your clean, curated, well-governed data for people to go consume, and that thing probably runs, if you're looking at a physical architecture, that thing probably runs on something that looks like a column store, right? Because you want lots of people to get at it really quickly. And I think one of the key things on the publish side is that you want the data to be versioned, right? And so when key elements of the data change, when you get a new column of data, a new record, or when one of the values changes in the tabular data set that you're consuming, that you've subscribed to, that you get a notice. Like, you can imagine being in a viz tool or a modeling tool downstream, and you get a notice that says, hey, there's a new set of records that are available for this data set that you were using last week. Do you want to add these, records to your data set? Or there's a new column, there's a new field available. Would you like to add that to your analysis, right? Or there are new values. The values have changed inside of your system. And in order to do that, you have to have this really well-versioned collection of the data. It gets not dissimilar to sort of versioning software and how it's built. And so So these are kind of the big. Oh, there's one more about it, which is like data feedback and usage, right? So the ability to see what data people are consuming, and also the ability for people that are consuming the data to feed back on the data. I kind of call this like Jira for data, right? Like there should be something when you're in any web app that's a data-driven web app that somebody's built for you, or you're in a Viz tool like Tableau or Click, or you're in a modeling tool, you're in SaaS or the modern ones like Data Robot or whatever, that the end users can say, hey, there's something wrong with this data. Like it needs to change in some way, shape, or form. And so, yeah. For me, these are kind of the big buckets.
Yeah. So I'm taking notes, right? So catalog, one, persistent storage compute as a cloud vendor with your pipeline, but it's going to have some orchestration. Right. Data mastering, you talk about data governance, privacy policy, talk about data consumption tools, which is like, where is the actual governed clean data going to live? Right. And then finally, this data feedback and usage, right? So people like the Jira for data. 7 things. Okay. So let me dig into this.
I've got like diagrams and blogs on my blog, right? It's like, just talk about this shit endlessly. Yeah.
So first of all, I'm surprised you didn't say, you didn't call out things like, ETL or like DBT and stuff like that. Are you putting that inside of the pipelining right now, or where does that go in?
So like ETL in my mind, like it's really, extract, transform, load, like it's data pipelining, right? Okay. More broadly written. And again, ETL tools were like the old way to do it, right? And, now the more modern things are, you look at like, I'm a big fan of Fivetran. I think that system's great. Like it's a replication system though. It's built for purpose. And like, like George, like, who's the founder, is a great guy and an life sciences guy like me. And like he built a great replication system. It moves data from wherever it was to wherever it's going. It's like the E and the L, right? And then he always says, oh, and you also need to do a bunch of transformation stuff, right? And like a logical thing to use for that is probably DBT, right? And we're like, yeah, that's great, transformation. And like we think of mastering as like, a combination of a bunch of these things. And so, and we love DBT. We think it's a great system, really, really useful in all kinds of ways. So like, but what I think this is the dynamic that's happening right now is like, as everybody moves to the cloud, all the different pieces of the, traditional data ecosystem are getting the lines are getting redrawn. Right. And so what was ETL before is now it's like, well, actually you take the T out of that and you can put it over on the side and you can do that differently. And you really focus, and you've got another set of tooling that you used to do E and the L part, and another, any like the Fivetran stuff. And then you've got a whole separate thing you used to do the T stuff. And each one of those is actually more best of breed at what it does. And so like, but right now with the cloud and people moving their data over, the center of gravity for the data over to the cloud, like all these lines are getting rewritten. And the Gartner and Forrester people, like their heads are spinning, right? Because they're like, wait a minute, we defined this category 20 years ago and it looks like X, Y, and Z, and this is where the lines are. And you're like, guess what? You got to draw some new boxes, guys. Like,
well, even Gartner's trying to adjust now, right? They don't really have a choice, but like, they're starting to kill off some old quadrants and things like that. For example, the metadata management quadrant has recently been killed off, right? And that's going to get replaced by, TBD, right? I'm sure they're going to announce some stuff, right?
Yeah.
But, that's an interesting topic, though. Just to click on that is like this topic of metadata. And actually, a few of your categories are a little sort of, let's call it like metadata oriented, right? Like catalog, mastering has a metadata element to it, data governance, privacy. You mentioned versioning. Data consumption, but part of that is like versioning and things like that. That's kind of metadata oriented. Yeah, it's interesting that you kind of split it, right? Is that going to stay split, or do you see that converging, or what do you think?
So here's the thing. My thing about metadata is like if data is like water, metadata is like the information, like whether the water is good or bad, or like whether it's like, like there's so much, it's sort of integral to everything. And so I have a really hard time taking metadata out and just doing it separately from one of these, like every component. So a good example. So my buddy Mihir, who is like, the new sort of top dog data guy at Fidelity, he's doing this huge project on Snowflake right now. And he sort of goes to all the source vendors across all of Fidelity. He goes to them and he says, listen, here are the specs for what you need to give me in order for me to consider your thing sort of publishable into this next gen data catalog that they're building for all of Fidelity. And like the spec has like, and here's the metadata you have to deliver for me, right? From your source, right? Like you just, and then he takes that and he sort of got ways of getting that metadata sort of persisted through the entire sort of to ultimately into the consumption. So that you've got this metadata sort of comes along with the data, and then it gets augmented as the data gets changed, as the data gets transformed and manipulated. So like, you know, I view metadata as something that persists like through the entire pipeline, and at every stage in the pipeline, in the life of the data from source to consumption, like it's getting enriched and enhanced and maintained. You're getting more and more metadata because you're doing stuff to it. So again, I just view metadata as like an integral part of everything, and all the endpoints need to have these methods. Just like Mihir sort of said to his source owners, he's like, hey, you got to give me this metadata in order for me to consume this thing. Otherwise, like, it don't work.
This is a very important key thing you just said. If data is like water, metadata is like the information, if that water is good or bad. Yeah. So it's integrated. It's part of everything. That's why I have a hard time of taking metadata out. That's a great insight. I want to
in the like the information about it's good or bad is like subjective, right? You're like, well, like, am I using this water? It's just like, what am I using the water to drink? I mean, am I going to drink it? Like, or am I using it?
That's why the metadata needs the context, needs the knowledge about that.
Context. That's right. Yeah. You know, am I using the water to flush the toilet?
No, Tim and I always talk about we need to go from this world of data first to knowledge first, and we call knowledge first is, hey, context is first, people is first, because hey, who is a user who's consuming that, right? Relationships are first, right? How is that water going to feed to this other thing? So it may not. So,
you know, there's a key point there, like this idea, like people being important. You know, I started studying AI back in the 1980s with this guy Marvin Minsky, and like Marvin taught me these two things. Like, you know, the first thing was, you know, no algorithm is useful without enough great data, you know, and you know, the second thing was it's always about people and the machine working together, humans and the machine working together. And it was sort of classic Marvin stuff, right? But it's so true, right? Like, you know, and it's especially true in these next gen data ecosystems. And the success of Snowflake really validates this, right? Like when, you know, Thierry and Marcin and Benoit, when they started Snowflake, and Mike and I, you know, we've always hung out with those guys because they're just database systems guys. And like they, you know, they were like, listen, we are going to make this all about collaboration. Like Snowflake is going to be all about better data collaboration. And it's kind of like that. You just log in, you can share tables the same way you share Google Docs, right? It's amazing. It's really powerful. And I think that, you know, part of the reason why Snowflake is so valuable now and is getting such uptick is that, you know, these collaboration features are what were a key part of what was missing in the traditional data ecosystem.
So by the way, you have an amazing background working with all these really cool people. I mean, saying that when we work with Mike Stonebreaker, knowing Marvin Minsky, like, man, I wish I can be a fly on the wall in those conversations. I want to go continue on one part. We started out saying we do one thing really well, and I've had conversations with other customers, prospects, even vendors who say, actually, if I do a lot kind of shitty so it's not bad, because I mean I have that one tool where I can get to value very, very quickly. So I mean, I don't want to name names there, but there's systems out there that we do some BI, we do some ETLing, we do some data storage, and it's like, this is your one-stop shop to actually very quickly hit the ground running instead of getting all these things together. Now I could argue that we're gonna make the arguments that they will outgrow that, right? They need a more powerful thing. But also, you can imagine that if I'm not a very sophisticated data company, and I just need to get some stuff quickly, like maybe that's what I need. I just need to have a lot of so stuff on everything, and that's not bad.
Right. Yeah. And you know, like, again, what's good enough, right? Like, and so like in some of these, if the vendor is clear, if whoever built the tool is like transparent about exactly what it is and what it does and how it behaves, right? And this is one of the biggest problems we've got in data, is like the vendors, especially the smaller ones, are just not, you know, clear enough about what their stuff does. Like it all sounds the same, and from the customer's perspective. And I know I was there. I was listening. Like, I just turned off the signal from all the marketing organizations and all the data vendors, because I'm like, the only thing I listened to is like what their customers had done and what they would advocate for. And or if they let me try it and you use it, like then I could tell you what it was good at and what it wasn't good at. And so the noise that's in the ecosystem is the most difficult thing. And using the system, and is one of the benefits I think of the cloud vendors, is like you don't have to go out and load trust some benchmark that Oracle publishes about whether their system is doing something or not. Like, you can just go use Google Bigtable and you can run your own tests and with your own data and see what it does or doesn't do. And there isn't some big license standing in between you and doing that. It's just consumption based, right? You want to go and test it out, you go do it. And so I think that it's got to be more about what the technology actually does. And in many cases, like, you go and use it, like it may be good enough, right? Like they may have not done, parts of the thing that well, but it may be good enough for you. That is look at, like, again, database system is a good example, right? Like you look at in Oracle in the early 90s when they came out with materialized views, like it was in response to the emergence of data warehouse appliances. The early data warehouse appliances, they were like, shit, like these read-oriented workloads are going to kill us if we don't do something. So they created materialized views. And then for like a decade, like materialized views were good enough, for most people. And then when we came along with Vertica, we would go in and like our customers were running these huge materialized views on these massive $1 million Oracle boxes. We would come in with a 4-node cluster running Vertica. We'd load the same data, and the queries that were running on their massive $1 million Oracle box were taking 24 hours to complete. We would run the same queries and they would complete in less than 5 minutes. And the customer was like, I don't believe this. There's no way. This isn't possible. We're like, well, if you look under the covers at what Oracle has you doing inside of their system, is they're taking the data that comes into the row store, they're copying it into additional versions of this in these materialized views. And so you're like multiplying the size of the data, not by like 5 or 10, like 100 times, right? In order to get this, some better performance. And the way the data is represented on disk is still in a column stored, so you're never going to get the query performance. When you put the data into columns, you compress the crap out of it, and you can query optimize these things. Like, it's just so much better. And and it just works. And now we kind of take it for granted, right? Because the design pattern has been proved out. But Oracle sold a lot of that materialized view stuff to a lot of people for a long time. And now even, like I won't go off on Oracle again, but now what they're selling you with Exadata is like, oh yeah, we're going to have you copy the data 1 million times, and we're going to sell you all the hardware you're going to need to run all those copies, and it's just the hardware is going to get more expensive, and it's just craziness, right? So I guess the risk is like when you buy into one vendor's hubris, like if that vendor's behaving badly, you can really get screwed, and like I think these open ecosystems, that's one of the reasons why people like open source stuff in general, right? It kind of helps to keep the vendors a little bit honest.
Yeah. Lock-in is a real thing to be worried about, right?
Terrifying.
And so, one last topic here before we start to kind of wrap things up is you mentioned about DataOps and how that's having a big influence on things. Curious, how do you see, how do you define DataOps? Because it's interesting to kind of, hear how different people approach that. And then how do you see it reshaping things, whether technology or, how we work?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, it really is this sort of very direct reference to DevOps. And, if DevOps is about build, testing, and releasing software continuously and, being able to build high quality software very, very quickly, DataOps is really about being able to build, test, and release data, very, very quickly at a very high level of quality. And so, those 7 sort of components are kind of how I think about, the components of a modern DataOps ecosystem. There's lots of ways you can draw the boxes, but ultimately you kind of have to, do the same stuff, right? You got to figure out where the data is coming from. You got to figure out who wants to consume it and how they want to consume it, and then you got to figure out how to get the data from where it's being published, or created, all the way over to where it's being consumed in the form in which the consumers want it. So, again, maybe I'm just sort of curmudgeonly about this stuff, having done it so many times. Like, it's the same basic stuff you have to do over and over again. And in some ways, it's like the latest sort of move of data to the cloud is like, we did this once in the 90s with data warehouses, and then in the 2000s, we started doing it again with data lakes, right? And now we're moving the data again, on the cloud. And, the part of the ecosystem that almost always remains less developed and less sophisticated is that consumption side, that publish side, because what usually happens, like, people have enough money, they're going to get started, and they start with the sources, and then they start moving over towards and they kind of run out of money in infrastructure and commitment, right? Before they get all the data over into this clean, curated thing. And I think the role model for data ops now are the big internet companies. They've had to do this with structured data. Google, Knowledge Graph is kind of my favorite example, where, like now when you do a search in Google and you search for J.J. Abrams, who is like, my favorite, like, I love that guy. He's unbelievable, right? I mean, that first Star Trek movie was, mind blowing, so good. And like, but like when you search for J.J. Abrams now, you don't just get a list of links, you get a info box, on the right-hand side. And that info box is highly curated out of Google Knowledge Graph. And it tells you everything you want to know about JJ and his wife, Katie, and great kids and all that, and all the movies they've made. It's like, and at the very bottom of that box is this little button that says send feedback. You could click on that button and it lights up every data element in the info box. And you click on the one that you think is wrong or is good or is bad. And then it lets you provide feedback to the Google Knowledge Graph curation team on that thing. So powerful, like that bidirectional flow of feedback on the quality of data in a very distributed way. Again, that's the human and the machine working together, right? And so I think those are the models for like what a modern data ops ecosystem looks like, right? They have this capability to build, test, and release data very, very quickly and very high level of quality. And they're sort of bidirectional in the flow of feedback on the data itself.
I love that perspective. And it's all about, when we do this well, we're going to be more productive. We're going to have higher quality systems. We're going to have more leverage. Data keeps getting bigger and more complicated. We're going to get more leverage. So, I mean, this is exciting.
Yeah, one other like fun example with this, like that I think is amazing, is that ultimately, at Tamr we do a lot of data mastering stuff, and ultimately you want to really control data quality at the point of data creation. So a lot of these data quality problems start in operational systems where somebody's got a bunch of fields on a screen and they're going to like fat finger a bunch of stuff in, right? And it's amazing, like when you're working inside of a modern enterprise today, like there's like very little auto suggest and autofill. Right? You go out into the modern internet, like I can't imagine using an e-commerce system or whatever without like being auto-recommended a list of, things that match the company name I'm trying to type in or the person name I'm trying to type in, right? And then when you select one, it autofills all the fields, right? Because it's essentially like it kind of knows already what you're trying to enter, and it's going to save you the time. It's going to be much easier. And it's a massive improvement in the quality of the data. But you go into the average enterprise, none of that happens, right? You go into the supplier entry screen for SAP and you're fat fingering yet another, duplicate of the same supplier over and over and over again. And we just know this because we see everybody on the data under the covers. Like when we did this for GE way back in the day, like, they thought they had 2.5 million suppliers. They only had 1.5 million globally. And GE thought they were better at supply chain management than anybody in the world. They were off by the number of suppliers they had by like more than 1 million. I can say this stuff now because like GE is kind of a bunch of different fun, right? But this is the reality. It's like we're really not very good at this kind of like modern data engineering stuff. And users now expect it. Like the average person that works in a big company and doesn't have this stuff when they come into work, they go home and they have all of these tools, right? We just have to do inside of big companies kind of what people are used to getting when they use modern internet apps at home.
Oh man, this is an amazing conversation, and I'm taking a bunch of notes. We'll summarize in a second. I mean, Andy, we got to do this again. I would love to just go fly to Boston and hang out with you and keep chatting about this stuff.
Like the more the merrier. Like I
awesome.
love you guys, right? Love you guys.
All right, well, let's get into our lightning round session. I told you we don't have lightning round questions when we started this conversation. Now we have many, so I'll kick it off. Will an open interoperability standard emerge for DataOps tools? Yes or no?
I'm gonna say no. Oh. I think because I think that they'll people will figure out patterns that work, but I don't think there'll be standards. I don't think standards are as useful. Yeah,
interesting.
I have to say that I've actually had a conversation yesterday with Bob Muglia, and I was looking at some of his talks, and he is very hard on we need standards for metadata and stuff like that. So it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen here. And I mean, it's a concern, right? The famous XKCD, right? You got 14 standards. Now we got 15 standards and so forth, right? So,
right.
Yeah. We're just adding to the problem, right? But there's opportunity there. Second question. It was all about the SQL, and then it was all about the NoSQL, and now it's all about the SQL again. Is SQL going to stay the supreme ruler here? Is it here to stay as king of the hill?
Absolutely, because and I'll tell why, right? The SQL is just a declarative language, and if we want lots of people to have access to data, we have to put a declarative language on top of these systems, right? Developers are going to like things like JSON. Always is going to be much better and easier for them. But if we want people to get access to the data, we need a declarative language for them to access the stuff. And so, I believe SQL is here to stay. And can I tell one anecdote?
Oh,
I was on the board of this company called Cloudin. It was one of the CouchDB companies. And we're sitting, these are like the NoSQL guys, right? Like they're so adamant about this. And we're sitting in a board meeting and they're like, blah, 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 blah. And I don't kind of pay attention, right? I hate these meetings. But the head of the company, the CTO, was saying, we've been talking to the Mongo people, which is like, okay, wait a minute, that's weird. Like they were supposed to be the biggest competitor, and we've decided we want to do a declarative language on top because all of our customers want and need a way to get data out of both Mongo and Couch, and we've decided that we're gonna sort of give them a version of SQL. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? You guys have been talking about this NoSQL stuff for 10 years, right? And now you're saying it's not NoSQL. And then they came up with this, it's not NoSQL, it's new SQL. And blah, blah, blah. Come on, right? It's not SQL. SQL's not bad. It's great, Even my partner, Stonebreaker, right? He had a whole different standard, declarative language standard in the early days, and he lost because the IBM guys, picked SQL along with Oracle. Yeah, Quell, right? Exactly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, everybody history. I'm a big history, computer science, and I love it. All right, I got a next question. You mentioned metadata in everything. Are semantics in everything?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a interesting semantic question. What are semantics? But
you can keep it as that, and that can be a topic for a follow-up.
Yeah, semantics are everywhere. Yes, big time believer. Yeah.
Nice. All right, final lightning round question for you: will monoliths make a comeback?
I think that monoliths, the new monolith, might be best of breed, sort of being masked as a monolith. I can imagine companies being really good at pulling together a collection of capabilities that are the best of breed, packaging them so they look like a monolith. And my favorite example of this is essentially Snowflake and Databricks are kind of like this, right? You don't buy persistence and storage from Snowflake and Databricks. They're just selling through the persistence and compute. And so what they've really done for you is they've kind of figured out how to make all the persistence and storage work and make it more accessible in the Databricks case in context of being a data scientist, or in Snowflake being a real data engineer. So
that's a fascinating concept there. The idea that, and I think I agree with you that Databricks and Snowflake are kind of a repackaging that, have created huge value in the process, but it's kind of a repackaging. That's interesting.
Totally. Yeah.
All right, so it's our TTT. Tim takes it away with takeaways. You go first, Tim, and I'll follow.
Yeah, sure. So, tons of good conversation today. I'll mention two things. One is the stack that you identified, this sort of these buckets, right? Catalog, the persistent storage or compute layer, the pipeline layer, data mastering, data governance slash privacy, data consumption tools, and then data feedback and usage. And thinking of that as a slightly different way, right? Everybody's got their modern data stack or their thing that they look at. I think this is a very interesting lens on all of this. And then also data ops, right? Where it's coming from, who's going to consume it, creating a more quality, repeatable, iterative approach to data, not just software, and making it so we can do this stuff well over and over and over again. So some good definitions and some good concepts here. And Juan, what about you?
Well, I'll start off. Monoliths are dead. That's what you started off with, right? You don't meet happy Palantir customers or stuff like that, right? Yeah, you'll pay tens of millions of dollars. It'll start great, but then it'll tail off. And in reality, there is no vendor, no products who are complete enough. So by definition, they are incomplete, and no vendor will have it all. So we need to have this best of breed. And this is interesting about we should just do that one thing very, very well, kind of stick in our swim lane. But hey, if another vendor says we can do more, well, just be honest about what's good enough, right? People can make that understand how to make that decision. I love this analogy of data is the water, metadata is like information about that water, which can be subjective too, but you understand the context around that stuff. And that's why metadata is all over the place. Declarative languages matter. Another very interesting thing that I want to go dig into later is this bidirectional feedback. And this is evolved in the metadata and the data ops, right? That's what truly the human and the machines working together means. Is like, here's something that the machine generated, the human should be able to go provide that and keep that, right? And this is the model for the modern data ops. And then another thing you just said is, when it comes to data quality, it's at the source. And everywhere, as consumers on the web, us as normal people, we go buy things, it's auto-suggest everywhere. Why the heck don't we do this for enterprise software? Like, I mean, we can avoid so much problems around if we just had auto-suggest, right? So this is a very interesting thing to go think about. So that's our summary of our discussion here. So throw it back to you, Andy. 2 questions. What's your advice about data, about life, or whatever? And second, who should we invite next on the podcast?
Yeah. So, in terms of advice, I think that the best thing to do when you're, building any modern data, ecosystem is to start with the questions, start with the consumption of the data, and work back from the questions that people have and that they need answered, and especially the ones that are really valuable to them. And, you will build the infrastructure to suit the questions that they have. And I think it's the opposite of where most people start. Most people start with the source. And I think we need to change the design point, for our data engineering ecosystems to starting with the consumption. In terms of who to have next, so I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to. I think you guys should have Stonebreaker on. It would be great. I'd be happy to get him lined up. The beauty about Mike is he's never, agreeable. He's always going to take the opposite opinion. So I think it would be really funny to have you guys, take him on for an hour and see what you get awesome. Out. Yeah.
Let's do this. I'll follow up with you. I'd love to have Michael Stonebreaker on the podcast. That is awesome.
Cool.
Andy, this has been a pleasure. We have so much stuff to go talk about next time. We're going to go do this again. And at least next time in Boston, we'll meet up for sure. And I like to cook. I'll go to your kitchen and make use of
it. Well, we'll definitely have somebody cook the meal because I can't. Thank you guys, Tim, Juan. Great to see you guys. Really fantastic.
This is awesome. And just as a reminder, actually next week we are taking a break because it's Thanksgiving week. So there's no show next week. After that, we're going to have Nick Schrock from Elemental. Right, they just raised her around. Right, they're doing Daxter. I did GraphQL. It's gonna be a fun conversation about the modern data stack, and also we have DBT Coalesce. Tim and I have been invited to be the host of the happy hour. Nice. So the DBT happy hour of Coalesce is going to be a special edition of Catalog and Cocktails. with our friends Claire Look and Matish Karya from the Zebra. They're great friends, and they're big DBT users and data.world users too. So we're just going to be super excited to have that good conversation. And Andy, again, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Great to see you.
Cheers. Great
Cheers.
conversation.